So, since lately I seem to be courting severe reactions from people, why don't I go ahead and continue that trend? And why don't we take a minute to talk about Wonder Woman and the importance of proportional representation. It's been interesting for me to watch the ongoing conversation about Wonder Woman as both a character and as a film in which that character is portrayed. Now, it's interesting to me because obviously at this point we know the critical reaction. It was overwhelmingly positive. We also know the box office, which has had amazing legs. Both of these are success stories. When we dive into people's reactions, things start to get a little bit more mixed. There are certainly plenty of people who are immediate to embrace this film, and it is, by my estimation, a good film, in fact, a very good film, and there have been lots of people who embrace it and clutch it and cling it to their heart and go, finally, a woman superhero, this is the next coming, this is amazing. And I'm very happy for those people. Unfortunately, what I've also seen happen is people who do not feel that the character is quite as well represented or that the film is quite as good have been jumped on in weird ways. Now, some of this is anecdotal. I haven't dealt with a ton of it myself, but I've known more than a couple of people and have encountered more as within podcast spheres that I listen to as people relay their own experiences with this movie and their feelings about it, that when they bring up concerns that they have, it becomes a very weird conversation that they have with people who basically are like, shh, don't point out the flaws in this. And then there is the other side of that coin, which are people who seem to really want to tear this film down because Wonder Woman is not feminist enough in the movie, or because her actions are driving a masculine narrative, because ultimately she solves most of her problems by punching them. Now, I don't actually want to have the conversation here right now as to whether Diana is portrayed as being too feminist, not feminist enough. Is it better that the film sort of fits the standard superhero narrative so that women can finally have representation within those narratives that have been existing for a while, that they've been excluded from? Would it have been better if she had a story that was more unique to a female perspective and that it wouldn't have been so easy to just slot a male hero in terms of the kinds of actions that she'd take? Should it have been made more uniquely feminine in its approach to both the film and to her as a character? Would that have been better? Did the film try and split the difference? Was that to the detriment of the film that it did? These are all questions worth discussing, but I don't want to discuss them here because I don't think any of them would be getting asked if proportional representation of women in film and superhero films, specifically in this case, was not a problem. And by proportional representation, I mean 50%, over 50% statistically, of the population of the planet that we all live on are women. Wonder Woman is the first female-led superhero movie since 2005, when Elektra came out. Between the release of Elektra and the release of Wonder Woman, there were 53 comic book-based superhero movies released to theaters, which either starred men or featured teams overwhelmingly made up of men. To not have had a single movie in 12 years and 53 other films, that's weird. And the thing is, that kind of creates the problem and the weird conversation that is happening around Wonder Woman as a result, because so much gets put on this film. This thing was carrying a crazy amount of weight that has no business being put on one film. It was effectively carrying 53 movies of weight onto one film, because I think it was a very valid concern that if Wonder Woman had tanked, it might have killed female-led superhero movies again, because they'd been killed previously. But that's ridiculous. How can just one bad film of a specific stripe of superhero lead to it just not happening for over a decade? Because there's not enough of them. The fewer that there are, the more important each individual one becomes. It's basic physics. It's the distribution of weight. It's the principle that a bed of nails works on. The more points of contact that there are, the less pressure there is on each individual one. If there is only one point of contact, all of the pressure is on that one point of contact. And in this case, if I were to step out of the metaphor, the pressure in this case is the pressure to be good. Now, the pressure on all of those other 53 male-led films was all fairly low. Some were great, some were terrible, but they didn't have to be good. Any one of those could fail, and the genre wasn't suddenly going to go away because there was plenty of other points of contact. There was plenty of weight to distribute the weight of and the importance of this genre across all these films. So one could fail, heck, 10 could fail. It wasn't going to kill the genre. But when you narrow it down to the more specific subgenre of female-led superheroes, it's just Wonder Woman. And if that had failed, it could have killed it. And we'd seen that happen before. And if you want to even take it out of the gender context, you go back to Batman and Robin, which many people blamed for killing superhero movies at the time. And, you know, there were some that were made within a few years of it, but really kind of effectively, as far as big budget superhero movies went, it did kill it. But the reason it was able to kill it is there was not nearly as many superhero movies coming out at that time. Batman pretty much was the standard bearer because other superhero movies either hadn't really gotten off the ground yet or hadn't connected. And so when the franchise carrying the weight of the superhero genre failed, that was kind of it for a bit. But at this point, we don't need that anymore. Even Batman, which I would say is still the premier franchise of among superheroes, the new Batman film could be awful. I hope it's not, but it could be. Superheroes aren't going to go anywhere in terms of their presence in film because there's so many of them. So when I say proportional representation, if the number of female-led superheroes was even close to the proportion of women in the prospective audience, then we wouldn't have to worry whether or not one film like Wonder Woman manages to be all things to all people, manages to be exciting enough, manages to be feminist enough. We wouldn't have to worry about that because if we had more women superheroes, then we could have one that is very much a strongly feminist character. We could have one that is more acting masculine and sort of playing in the boys club kind of thing. We could have one that tackles things from a more uniquely female perspective as opposed to just solving all the problems with punching. We could have a diversity of it if there was just more places to do it. The other thing that's worth bringing up is how weird, again, the conversation got about Black Widow in Age of Ultron and the thing that happened with her storyline there. And again, I don't really want to get into whether or not what was done, specifically in terms of revealing that she wasn't able to have kids and the impact that had on her as a character. I don't necessarily want to get into whether or not that was a good thing or not. But the conversation that happened that basically said, see, they reduced her value to the fact that she can't be a mother. Therefore, she thinks she's a monster. Sexism. And again, I don't want to say whether or not that is sexist, but I don't think it's a conversation that would have had to happen if she wasn't literally the girl of the Marvel MCU. If there were more, then she would be allowed that space to explore the idea of how having the choice to ever become a mother taken away from her impacts her as a character without having to bring in all this meta baggage. But she's stuck with the baggage because she's kind of it. Yes, we've got Scarlet Witch now, we'll get Captain Marvel, but even Marvel, which is, you know, I praise Marvel a lot. I get labeled a Marvel fanboy often. They've been way too slow to get on this bandwagon. And actually I would say diversity across the board. They're finally doing better with some of the stuff they're lining up, but it's still not proportional representation. And it's especially frustrating with comic books, whether it's DC or Marvel, because you look at the actual cast of the comics, there is a much better degree of representation, especially if you're talking about women, in the comic books than the movies indicate. So if we could just get more examples, honestly, good or bad, if we just had more, there'd be less pressure on each one. And we could stop having this thing where a female character is put front and center and is getting taken down by people saying we need more strong women, but then they go, but not that. If there were more options, there would be one that could meet their standard, but we wouldn't also lose whatever it was, this one that they thought wasn't good enough. We could have a buffet of choice. We could have the kind of diversity that we get in our male characters, where some are paragons like Captain America, some are deeply troubled and compromised like Iron Man. We don't have that diversity of female characters, and there's no reason that we shouldn't. I think I'm going to close by saying something that I read Sigourney Weaver said. Now, unfortunately, I am slightly too lazy to look up the exact quote, but what she said when she was asked about female representation in films, she basically made a plea to screenwriters. And she said, look, half the population is female. So if you write a script and half of the characters aren't female and there isn't a story-based reason for that to be the case, please fix it. And yeah, that's pretty much where I land. And that's not saying you can never make a story that's about men or that is predominantly a male story. Of course you can. You absolutely can. I would in fact make the argument that there are films that would be better if they had the female characters removed. Predator comes to mind. But unless that is specifically what you're doing, and if you want to do that, that's fine. That's a perfectly valid thing to do. But if that's not what you're doing, if you're just trying to tell a story and it's not a man story, then it should be half women. The characters should be half women, proportionally. It just should. And there's no reason why it can't be. And if we could get there, then these weird, bizarre reactions to things like Wonder Woman, or possibly even the casting of the Doctor, might not have to happen at all. We wouldn't have to all be jumping on these few examples because there'd be plenty of others that we could turn to. So those are my thoughts on proportional representation filtered through the idea of Wonder Woman and the place of female superheroes in film. So, what are your thoughts on all this? Whatever they are, if you could keep them respectful, I'd greatly appreciate it. I know I've been courting more, I don't want to say controversial, but I guess heated topics lately, but part of the reason is I like seeing well thought out responses, even ones that disagree with me. I love having those conversations. I do reply to some of the comments, so if you can keep it respectful, by all means disagree with me. If you want to praise me, that works too. But whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, check me out on Twitter at Council of Geeks. Give a listen to the Council of Geeks podcast, available on iTunes and Stitcher. And until next time, this council is adjourned.